Our next session will focus on anti-doping, ensuring fair play in aquatics. Our panel today will elaborate on the progress each party is making with anti-doping and the fight for clean sport. At this time, I'm happy to introduce our panel of speakers. Jordi, Segura, Fina Doping Review Board. Please join me on stage. Sébastien, Gillot, Director of the WADA European Regional Office and International Federation. And Benjamin Cohen, Director General of International Testing Agency. Thank you for joining me on stage. I would like to welcome Jordi Segura to the podium to start off with his presentation.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. And first of all, I would like to thank for the invitation to this presentation. I think it's very interesting that we can have this big audience for a topic like anti-doping. I'm happy for that. I'm not so happy because I need to speak immediately after lunch. Then I have the challenge that you don't fall asleep. I hope it will not. Then I will try also to contribute to the topic of ensuring a fair play in aquatics together with my two other colleagues that will speak later on. I think that it's clear that all of us, we share the best for our sport. And then it means that we share the values for anti-doping, that is to maintain a doping control programs of the highest standards that can guarantee and preserve the integrity of our sport. In fact, in Fina, at the end of the 90s, there were several doping cases, even also some traffic cases of growth hormone and other things. And it was clear that Fina needed to update its structure to face really the new anti-doping area. And in this regard, there was the creation of some committees. In fact, if you go to the Fina website, you can see how this new policy of Fina is important. There is anti-doping that you can see there. It's a full column of different topics that are very important for our anti-doping activities. And at the same time, on the left, there are two panels that are the ones who are responsible for dealing with anti-doping matters. One of them is the Doping Control Review Board, the one who I am the chairman at present. And the other one is the doping panel, who is the sanctioning and panel that handles the hearing cases. In fact, the Doping Control Review Board is appointed by the Bureau, but is mainly from physicians specialized in sports medicine, and also in scientists that are experts in laboratory matters in anti-doping. The general activity of Doping Control Review Board in Fina is really to supervise and suggest any modification or on the rules on the activity of anti-doping policy in Fina. In real practice, our, let's say, everyday life is mainly combined from two different aspects. One of them is when there appears any atypical or adverse finding, the Doping Control Review Board needs to review all the documentation, needs to check that all the procedures have been done properly from the sample collection, transport to the laboratory, analysis in the laboratory and evaluation, and then to guarantee that all it fits with the regulation. And another task we have is, from time to time, also is to have the therapeutic use exemptions. That is to allow athletes who need a medication that there is not any other alternative that to use some medication that belongs to the prohibited list, that this to be done on a fair way. Then, in fact, the structure that Fina has for anti-doping starts with the Fina office. It's people that really works daily with all the matters that need to be developed for the real practice of the anti-doping policy. The Doping Control Review Board, as I explained, that has some different activities. The doping panel, who will judge the outcome of the cases, and eventually, of course, a potential appeal to the Court of Arbitration for Sport. In fact, any evaluation that the Doping Control Review Board makes on a case, it goes to the doping panel, and the doping panel calls for a hearing, and of course, it takes into account our recommendation, but it takes into account also other evidences or information, and then they make the last sanctioning and decision on the case. In any case, for FINA, the terms of reference in anti-doping are both. In one hand is the handbook of FINA, where are the FINA anti-doping rules, and the second one is the World Anti-Doping Code. Nowadays is the edition of 2015, but soon there will be the edition of 2021, as soon as it arrives. What is important is the rules in the handbook, that are the ones that all of you can look at. They are really now updated fully with the code terms. Then they are really take into account all the modifications that are introduced in the code. For instance, in the last code, there were some aspects that were new ones, to some extent. There were intelligent testing, incorporating then the athletic blood passport, the monitoring the performance of the athletes if somebody is surprising by an unexpected performance, the whistleblowing possibility, also collaboration with other bodies that are involved in anti-doping, education, then introduce an education program that was not in FINA until that moment, and also, of course, to evolve with any new thing that needs to be incorporated, but also always preserving the excellence of our work. Then, what is clear is the FINA rules. As I said, they are totally now in cooperation and aligned with the main documents of the code. For instance, the international standards. Here there is a list of some of them. There are a couple more that are taken into account for establishing the anti-doping rules in FINA. And not only the international standards, but also the technical documents that there is a third level in the code, that some of these international standards, they have more specific rules that dictate some kind of analysis or testing and so on. Here there is only a partial list, that the ones that we are following in FINA as well. Then in practice, our efforts, according to the international standards and the guidelines, is that we have established a risk assessment of the disciplines in FINA. We have established a registered testing pool of athletes that are more controlled than others because of different aspects that I will mention afterwards. Of course, to develop a test distribution plan that takes into account the majority of the aspects I have mentioned before, and also to follow the athlete biological passport as an element who can contribute with very interesting, intelligent information for target testing or for suspicion testing. In the risk assessment, this is a dynamic process, and that FINA takes into account many different aspects that are, for instance, mentioned in the slide in the lower part. But at the end of the day, it means that we need to estimate some risk for the different disciplines that are part of aquatics. And this is just an example. This is not a definitive one. This is a dynamic process. But as you can see, we consider some of the disciplines more risky than others regarding the need to an intensive anti-doping program. Another aspect is to establish the registered testing pool. It means that those athletes that really are to be monitored much more frequently, and also that the whereabouts should be controlled more strictly, that also they correspond mainly the athletes that are in high level in our competition. Also athletes that have had success in more recent Olympic championships, championships or Olympics. Also athletes that have been suspended and wants to return to activity, sudden improvements of performance, and etc. This is the basis for establishing the restricted testing pool. At the present time in Fina, you can see on the right-hand side that there are more than 200 swimmers. There are 35 players in open water, 20 in diving, 24 in artistic swimming, and 53 in water polo. And there was also a testing pool, athletes that are not so high level in each discipline, but they are also controlled very, very closely. Regarding the test distribution plan, there are many aspects to devise, but I think one interesting is that depending on the discipline, on even inside the discipline, the kind of effort, more aerobic or anaerobic, that should be developed, we should also test differently according to ESAs, it means erythropoietin and related substances, or growth hormone releasing factors. Then we need to adjust our test analysis to each discipline according to a table like this. In practice, our sample collection in Fina is done usually by delegation to national anti-doping organizations or to private companies like IDTM or some others, depending on the case. The samples used to be urine or whole blood for biological passport and transfusion, or blood serum for many other measurements of hormones and so on. Analysis is always carried out in WADA-accredited laboratory, and we have long-term storage. We stored samples in major championships, and they can be stored up to 10 years, or depending on how the rules of the anti-doping code are established. Then, just to give you some statistics of our Fina efforts, for instance, in 2016, we collected about 4,600 samples. 65% were of urine, 22% were from blood for ABP or transfusion, and 12% were for serum for other markers. And also, we carried out a specific test for erythropoietin-related substances, for growth hormone, or for blood, for hemoglobin carriers, and so on. What is interesting, these were data from 2016. From 2017, okay, there was a clear increase. We increased about 15% in the number of samples. Then we reached about 5,400 samples along the whole year. But what is more interesting, for a specific analysis, like isotope ratio mass spectrometry, ESAs, growth hormone, etc., we nearly doubled the number of tests that we did in 2016. Also, of course, all the countries that have relevant swimmers are tested in our program. But of course, there are some countries that are tested more often because they have more athletes in this registered testing pool. In 2017, the first were Russia, China, USA, Brazil, Spain, France, etc. But it's interesting to know that the distribution by disciplines in aquatics was mainly for swimming, 75% of the test, followed by water polo, open water diving, and artistic swimming. And distribution between in competition and out of competition in Fina, out of competition takes nearly 83% of the number of samples. Of course, it depends on the competition that are every year. When there is summer competition, summer world championship is higher than there is when there is winter championship, but it more or less is in this scale. Thanks to all that, what is the position that Fina occupies among the international federations? Then I think it's interesting that Fina is the third in number of samples tested after cycling and after athletics. Then we are really on top of the effort for anti-doping among federations. And what is also more important is for some specific tests, we are in the first, in the second, or in the third place. Then Fina is one of the federations who are really testing more often and more intensively. And the good news is that in spite of that, the rate of positiveness in Fina in the last year was 0.2%, much lower than other related, for instance, cycling and athletics that they have 1% or 0.5%. Then I think we should be relatively proud of the efforts of Fina and the results of our activity. In 2018, I just have the data here of the number of tests in different countries, just to have an idea, and you can see that there are 2 countries that are more or less on top, are USA and Russia, in the number of tests carried out. Afterwards, there is a group of 4 countries, more or less, China, Australia, Italy, and Japan, that follow the number of tests. Afterwards, Hungary, Great Britain, France, Netherlands, etc. But nearly all countries that have some relevant swimmer are tested by our program. And just to finish, just another activity, interesting activity of our work is the therapeutic use exemptions. For that, we have a committee that is chaired by Dr. David Gerard, who at the same time is the chair of the WADA TUE committee. And this is the summary of the work that they have done in this year, 2018. 43 cases of therapeutic use exemption, mainly of glucocorticoids and stimulants, mainly for attention deficit disorders in this case. And you can see on the right-hand side the distribution of these cases among the different disciplines of aquatics. What is the future? Well, the future for us is that Fina wants to continue at the forefront of the fight against doping in sport. Nevertheless, we will closely follow up any advance and improvement developed by WADA or by any other body that can be incorporated in our program to make it even better. And just to finish, the last slide, a couple of maybe messages for some people of the national federations that can be here, is to explain to them that our structure in Fina of 2 levels, one of them by the Doping Control Review Board to really review the strategic policy of Fina and also to review each potential case in detail. And afterwards, a second power that is the doping panel, who really takes the final decision on the hearing and the final decision of the case. It has been very, very successful. And to this extent, maybe this can be also made in some other lower organizations. And also, regarding the therapeutic use exemption that you at national level, you also do, please take care and ask for all the medical justifications and documentation needed. In Fina, we have reviewed some national therapeutic use exemptions that were not so well done, and we needed to go back to say, please, try to improve that. And last word, I think all of us, nevertheless, we look to our goal, and our goal is that we swim in clean water. But clean water is not only in the swimming pool. Clean water is in our bodies. We have 60% of our body is water. Our urine, our blood, our cells, our tissues are also made of water. And this is the water that we as anti-doping fighters would like to be clean. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Segura. Now I invite Mr. Gillot to the stage for his presentation.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much. I would like to start by thanking very much the Fina for having WADA today to give a presentation on our activities. First of all, I would like to go through a very quick reminder of what is WADA, what are our activities. I'd like then to go through the main challenges that the world of anti-doping is facing at the moment, and finally to finish on the contribution of Fina and the Aquatics family as a whole. So first of all, just a reminder for those, I'm sure those, most of you are familiar with that, but WADA, the World Anti-Doping Agency, was established in 1999, so it's going to be 20 years next year. It was established on the so-called Festina affair, I would say, with the mission to lead a collaborative worldwide movement for doping-free sport. Our headquarters are based in Montreal, but we have regional offices in all corners of the globe, which makes our staff to 100 people and over 40 nationalities, sorry. Our budget is about 32 million US dollar a year, which is coming equally from the sports movement and from the public authorities, the governments of the world. Our key activities, anti-doping administration and management, scientific research, education, development of anti-doping capacities, so working with anti-doping organizations to make sure their anti-doping programs are of the best quality. Intelligence and investigation, which is one of the new activities. Monitoring compliance with the World Anti-Doping Code, which takes a lot of our time in the past few years. Jordi has talked about the main document that is important for the fight against doping, which is the World Anti-Doping Code, as well as the international standards. The code is the basis of every anti-doping program, and it's here to make sure that all of the athletes are protected, that their rights are protected, and that all of the sports and all of the governments have rules and policies which are aligned and which are the same in the world. So we have 683 signatories, signatories to the code, which are international federation or national anti-doping organizations. On the part of the governments, we are working with the UNESCO. All governments of the world are asked to sign the UNESCO International Convention Against Doping in Sport. We have 187 state parties out of 193, so 99% of the globe are signatories of the UNESCO Convention. Our partners, so you will see at the center of our activities the athletes and the athletes' entourage, which is obviously the key stakeholder. But working around the athletes are obviously the IOC, the IPC, the International Federation, the National Olympic Committees, the National Paralympic Committees, the NADOs, the RADOs, the other major organizers of major events. The UNESCO and the governments of the world, which are very important to align the laws in all of the countries. Around that, we have the WADA accredited laboratories, which are obviously analyzing all of the samples which are collected by the anti-doping organization. And to discuss the sanction, we have the Court of Arbitration for Sports. So the code was first introduced in 2004 as a basis for all of the anti-doping organizations to align their rules to make sure that the anti-doping world was working on the same, on a level playing field. Before the revision of the second revision of the code in 2015, our role was more focusing on making sure that all of the anti-doping organizations in the world had adopted the code and had policies and rules in line with the code. And actually, since 2015, since the new code entered into force, we have some strengthened possibilities, some strengthened powers and tools to make sure that our work can be even more efficient than it has ever been. So we established in 2014 the Independent Compliance Review Committees, whose task is to assess the implementation of the code and the compliance and non-compliance of the signatories of the code. We also have now powers of investigation. We know that intelligence testing is the most important is the most efficient way to fight against doping. So now we have powers of investigation, which helps a lot the work, which at the end of the day has helped WADA to shift our activities and shift our focus not only on the fact that anti-doping organizations actually have rules in place, but rather checking that the anti-doping programs that those ADOs are implementing on the ground are of good quality. So the compliance of the signatories with the code is very important to our activities now. So the anti-doping movement has a lot evolved in the past few years, especially with the Russian doping crisis. It's very obvious that it has been very disruptive for all of us, and it has put a lot of pressure on the anti-doping movement. We've seen with this crisis, we've seen some conflicts amongst our stakeholders. We've seen some conflicts amongst those stakeholders with decisions which were not understood by all of the stakeholders, and which at the end of the day has resulted in the lack of confidence and in the lack of trust for the anti-doping community from the athletes and from the public. So that's where we need to work together to make sure that this confidence and trust is brought back into the anti-doping movement. From a WADA perspective, we obviously acknowledge that this crisis has been of much importance, that it has been very disruptive for everyone. But we believe that from a WADA perspective, we have reacted in the proper way, meaning that we've been listening to all of our stakeholders. We've been listening to the challenges that all of our stakeholders have been facing with this issue. We've been taking actions as well to evolve and to adapt to the new framework, to the new environment in which we are. And we believe that we've grown from this crisis. Obviously, it's not finished, but we've seen some great progress in WADA, and we've seen some great progress in the anti-doping movement. And we believe that at this stage now we are much stronger, which we are in a much better position to fight against doping. As we've seen earlier, the main activities for WADA are summarized on this graph. But actually, in the past few years, we have enhanced all of the major activities that we already had. Plus, we added some more activities, which are anti-doping organization compliance, as I mentioned earlier, intelligence and investigation, which is key now to an intelligent fight against doping. And we have created a proper whistleblower program to receive all of the testimonies from the stakeholders within the anti-doping movement. This is obviously in every public appearance for WADA. This is obviously the elephant in the room. So I thought it was important to give you a quick update on the Resada Compliance. As you know, Resada was declared non-compliance in 2015, and since then there has been a lot of work being made with all of our partners, especially with UK anti-doping, supporting our work on the ground to make sure that Resada was reformed and that we could have confidence in Russia anti-doping. And actually, way before the decision of the WADA Executive Committee back in September of this year, Resada was already functional, was already testing, was already educating its athletes and carrying out investigation. So as you know, on the 20th of September of this year, the WADA Executive Committee decided to reinstate Resada, but under strict conditions, which are mentioned here. The first one is to make sure that all of the authentic data from the Moscow laboratory are delivered to WADA by the end of this year, by the 31st of December 2018, and that following that, all of the reanalysis of the sample as requested by WADA will be made by the 30th of June, 2019. And in addition to that, it was agreed as well that Resada would undergo an audit very soon. So I think this graph gives you a better understanding of where we are and where we were. before this decision. So what is important as well to know is that Russian athletes were still competing during the time that Resada was declared non-compliant. This is obviously not something that WADA has jurisdiction on. At the same time, Resada was reformed, and already since 2016 it was already functional, and they had already restarted testing. And actually, since the decision of the WADA Executive Committee on September, based on the Compliance Review Committee recommendation, we now are facing two situations. Either Resada is complying with those strict conditions and delivering to WADA the authentic data from the Moscow laboratory, and then we will be able to prosecute some cases and declare some new anti-doping rule violations and also exonerate some athletes. Either they don't do that, and then we will declare Resada non-compliant again under stricter rules, which are those of the International Standard for Code Compliance of Signatories, which entered into force in April of this year. So now the ball is very much in the camp of Resada, and where we are at the moment. So a couple of weeks ago, people from WADA met with Russian authorities, and there will be another visit very soon for all of the data from the Moscow laboratory to be retrieved. And as I said already, there will be an audit this week of Resada. If the conditions are not met by the end of the year, it is clear from the WADA board that Resada should be declared again non-compliant. Going back to aquatics and anti-doping and the contribution from Fina. Well, first of all, as I mentioned earlier, we are very much looking at the compliance of our signatories now, and I have to say that Fina has done a tremendous work in this regard, and there was a compliance review questionnaire which was delivered to international federations in the past few years, and Fina had demonstrated that its anti-doping program was very robust. Together with WADA, we made some very minor adjustments in very specific areas, but all in all, the program was very strong. Fina also collaborated with our intelligence and investigation department to analyze the data from the Moscow laboratory that we already have regarding the Russia crisis. And as Jordi mentioned, Fina is obviously in a very strong position in anti-doping at the moment, and we could see that with the involvement of Fina in the Commonwealth Games anti-doping task force for the Commonwealth Games of this year in Gold Coast, with the involvement of Fina in the coordination with national anti-doping organization for pre-testing efforts, which is very important to reassure the public that all of the athletes in your sport are actually tested prior to major events such as the Commonwealth Games or the Olympic Games. This is things which are going to echo with what Jordi said before. The main challenges we believe in aquatic is this dynamic risk assessment, coming from the fact that aquatics is obviously representing a few different disciplines, which have very different specificities in terms of physical needs for the athletes. Also, depending on the geographic of the disciplines and the geographics of the competition, it is something that is very complicated for Fina to assess, and that's why it needs to be important to use the resources and the intelligence in the proper manner. The other main challenge is the large testing pool, the large athletes pool that aquatics has. Aquatics is a very popular sport, so it is important as well to educate the athletes. But obviously, when you have so many athletes in so many disciplines, this is very tricky. So collaboration with national anti-doping organizations, collaborations with national federations is very important as well. And maybe 3 takeaways for national federations. First of all, education is key on the ground. You know your athletes, you have events on the ground at national level. You also have the power to educate the athletes, but also the athletes' entourage, so it's very important that you play this role. You have national anti-doping organizations on your territories as well. You know Aquatics better than anyone, but actually national anti-doping organizations know anti-doping, so a collaboration with national anti-doping organizations on the ground is very key. The relationship should be a win-win for everyone at the end of the day. And last but not least, we know that anti-doping is a very complex matter, so rely on the experts in this sense with your national anti-doping organizations, with the body as well from Fina to learn and build your experience. We know that anti-doping it's an administrative burden, and we know that it's not always easy to implement anti-doping programs, but think about the value that it has for your sport, the value that it has in terms of image for your athletes and so on. Concentrate on that rather than focus on the administrative burden that it represents. And finally, what we believe the future holds, WADA was created to really foster cooperation between the sports movement and the governments of the world, and now in the moment that we are facing, we all need to work together, we need to collaborate, all of us with our governments, with our national anti-doping organizations, with our national federations, to make sure that we work hand in hand and have a structured and a strong fight against doping, because we know that division is only serving the cheats, and that's why we all have together a responsibility to make sure that we fight against doping as much as we can. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Gillot. Now I invite Mr. Cohen to the stage for his presentation.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, dear FIBA family, dear Mr. President and Executive Director. Thank you very much for your invitation and for having me here. It's a true honor to be here in China. I could attend this morning some coaching clinics, and so it was a deep dive into your sport of aquatics, so I'm really grateful for that. I'm here to introduce for those of you who have not yet heard about this new initiative, the International Testing Agency. The International Testing Agency was established in 2017 and was constituted as a not-for-profit foundation in Switzerland. The ITA, as we call it, was called for by the Olympic Summit in 2015 after several scandals in sports and anti-doping in particular. The Olympic Summit is a gathering of the most senior leaders of the Olympic movement, amongst which the FINA president. And at that time, in 2015, the Olympic Summit gathered and said, well, there seems to be too many issues in anti-doping and sports organizations. It is time to make anti-doping independent from sports organization. At that time, the Olympic Summit decided to ask WADA, as the global regulator, to take that initiative and to lead the project. And I remember it was exactly 3 years ago, and I received actually a call from the Director General of WADA at that time, and I was at that time working for the International Basketball Federation and managing anti-doping there. And I received a call asking me if I could be part of this working group to study the feasibility of the ITA. And I remember feeling, I'm telling you very transparently, I remember feeling almost insulted by the idea that because you work for sports organizations, you are not capable of fighting doping in your sport, because you would have a conflict. On one side, you need to promote your sport, and on the other side, you need to police it. And so I was not too keen on the idea, but anyway, the work pursued. We worked, public authorities, national anti-doping organizations, and the sports movement worked under a WADA working group to study the feasibility of the ITA. And this is then later on that once the ITA became more and more a finished product, that I understood what it can actually bring to sport. And it's not only independence, the removal of perceived or actual conflict of interest. This is indeed, I think, in nowadays, extremely important for the fans, for the athletes, for the communities. They want to see more independence in that area. But it's also about expertise, really anti-doping expertise, with a true center of expertise that could bring together different skills that are required to effectively fight doping. The objectives, as well as the ITA, was to say, well, if we create an independent authority that could manage anti-doping for sports, this is also a guarantee that all those sports organizations that are signatory to the code will remain compliant with the World Anti-Doping Code. It was also about maximizing the resources, creating economies of scales, and using the existing resources that the sport movement has invested in anti-doping to restore the trust and credibility of the system. This is all nice principles, but how do you then convert that into a real added value for the sports organizations and encourage them to join this initiative? Well, there are several ways to do that. Well, one of them, as I said, is expertise. And here I think Fina, and as explained by Jordi, has been at the forefront of the fight against doping, and it has truly created expertise among its families. This was really clearly shown in the presentation. So expertise for the ITA, I think, is potentially addressing smaller federations that do not necessarily have the resources to put in place strong anti-doping programs. But at the moment, the ITA has 20 staff, all dedicated to anti-doping. They live and breathe anti-doping. They do that all day. And I'm pretty sure that while Fina has expertise, by cooperating with the ITA, there are ways to even increase that expertise and to create even more cooperation. In addition to that, I'm trying to remember in terms of, added value, in addition to expertise, the ITA is here to create solutions. We're talking about IT solutions, we're talking about platforms that can bring to the organizations an added value. So it's not only about expertise, it's also about having a center that creates new solutions in terms of doping control officers, in terms of therapeutic use exemptions. We are cooperating now with artificial intelligence organizations that can use the existing data to target tests in a better manner. So adding value also means, I think nowadays reputation is also an added value, and cooperating with the ITA can do that, restoring trust and building credibility among our ranks. Now, we are building this new house with, as I said, 20 staff at the moment. Soon we will be 25, and by the end of next year we will be 30 people. At the moment, there are actually 39 already international federations that have decided to partner with us. The International Olympic Committee has also decided to fully delegate its anti-doping program to the ITA, so that the ITA started operations by managing the Pyeongchang anti-doping program, and followed this summer by managing the Youth Olympic Games in Buenos Aires. We are at the moment working really hard to prepare Tokyo 2020, as well as the Youth Olympic Games that will take place in Lausanne, also in 2020. And before that, there will be the Universiade, University Games in Krasnoyarsk, the Winter University Games. And the ITA will attend the European Games in Minsk and the Pan American Games in Lima as an observer. So we are really building capacity and helping different organizations, be compliant with the code, but also increase the level of expertise. In terms of our internal organizations, I don't want to go too much into details, but I'm happy to answer any questions you have. We have 3 main units. The first one is testing, obviously. So we do in-competition testing, out-of-competition testing, and major events testing. And this is all fueled by a science and medical department. The science part of the department is doing risk assessments, intelligence and working with various companies to build that intelligence and really fuel the test distribution plan. The medical side deals obviously with the therapeutic use exemptions, with the athlete biological passports, but as well the long-term storage of samples, as Jordi mentioned, and the network that we are building with all the WADA accredited laboratories. This is the second unit, and the third one obviously is the legal and compliance unit. The legal department manages all the positive results and works first with the athletes, do the notification, offer the athlete the opportunity to open a B sample if there is a positive, and then manages the result. And very soon, also as an initiative of the IOC, sports organizations will be encouraged to delegate the results management, the sanctioning process, to the Court of Arbitration for Sport as well, in this effort for increased independence. So the ITA will manage the test results and bring, on behalf of the sports organizations, the cases forward to the Court of Arbitration for Sport in the future. We are also running, obviously, education programs on behalf of sports organizations and doing outreach activities, either on-site, on the competitions, or at selected events of our partners. So we are, as I said, extremely busy. We've been in operation for a bit less than a year, but building capacity at great speed. The real focus for us now is obviously Tokyo. And we have to make sure that in addition to running the game time program, we also initiate pre-game activities. We want to make sure that all the athletes that will be in Tokyo will have been subject to an anti-doping program. This is really important, and this is also part of regaining trust among the public. I think there's some calls as well from the athletes in any sports that they practice. They are never too sure at the moment whether the competitor has been subject to the same testing program than he or she has. And this is really as well part of our initiative, is to really create a level playing field and to make sure that everyone is subject to the same requirements, whatever the sport you practice, whatever the discipline you practice. So to conclude, as I said, I remain open to any questions. I think we'll have an ambitious roadmap at the ITA. I obviously look forward to cooperating with Fina. I think, again, the expertise is in this room among the athletes, among the coaches, among the national federations. The idea of the ITA is not to steal the programs of the federation. It's really to work hand in hand with the federation and try to promote and increase the level of expertise in everything we do in terms of anti-doping. So on that, I conclude and thank you very much for your attention and look forward to the discussion.